Our next presentation will be by Dr. J. Van Bavel, who is a professor of psychology and neuroscience at New York University, an affiliate of the Stern School of Business and Management and Organizations, professor at the Norwegian School of Economics, and director of the Center for Conflict and Cooperation. He is also an associate editor of the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, Nexus. Jay studies how shared identities and belief can unite people or drive them apart, and what that reveals about the human mind in society. Jay has published over 150 academic papers and is a Clarivate highly cited researcher in the top 1% of researchers worldwide. Jay is also an active science communicator and writes the Power of Us newsletter. Without further ado, here's Jay's presentation.
I'm here today to talk to you about my research on inside AI echo chambers, how sycophantic AI increases extremism and overconfidence. Now, many of you may be aware that AI, in particular chatbots, are arguably the fastest growing technology in human history. It took almost no time for companies like GPT to have chatbots that had nearly 1 billion weekly users. And you could see almost every other modern type of technology took many, many more years to reach it. Now, what is the impact of that on society and how we think about the world and our beliefs? Well, there was initially some really promising evidence that AI could be a helpful companion. So research out of MIT found that when they created an AI chatbot that was designed specifically to debunk conspiracy theories in conversations with people who held those conspiracy theories, that it was actually effective in reducing their conspiratorial mindsets and beliefs. And these effects actually lasted for several days and weeks. And so this was a real revelation. This research got a lot of attention, and it suggested that maybe AI was going to be really promising, at least in the domain of like making people believe more accurate information and maybe providing a really powerful tool in the fight against misinformation and conspiracies. Now, that's just one view on AI. Many people who are using AI are seeing that there might be some significant challenges. A few months ago, this post on social media went viral. The dumbest person you know is being told that you're absolutely right by chatbot GPT. And the reason is because GPT is designed to give people positive feedback to ensure that they stay on the platform and that the platform grows in terms of its customer and user base really rapidly. The question, of course, is what is this doing to us psychologically? And the critical thing here is this is how nearly 1 billion people are using it. Very few people, a tiny, tiny sliver, are using the debunked design version. So it's critically important that we understand how it's actually being used in the wild by hundreds of millions of people. And the question I'm going to ask today, and hopefully provide some evidence that answers it, is AI creating personalized echo chambers? Okay, what do I mean by an echo chamber? Well, in particular, in the context of AI, I don't mean you're surrounded by people who agree with you, like you might see in the real world where people are surrounded by others with like-minded views who reinforce their beliefs. The question is whether the sycophantic nature of AI is reinforcing people's beliefs and actions to make them feel justified, and might even be making their beliefs hardened or even more extreme. And it turns out that a recent paper that only came out a few weeks ago in Science magazine, where they analyzed 11 different chatbots, the research found pretty consistently that every single chatbot was sycophantic. And their mainline conclusion in the abstract of that paper is, on average, large language model chatbots were 50% more sycophantic than humans, even when users engaged in unethical, illegal, or harmful behavior. And so this means even when you're talking about something illegal you did, it's giving you positive reinforcement that that's appropriate or acceptable. The same if you engage in unethical or harmful behavior. And there's been many media reports about people going down these spirals, delusional spirals of false beliefs, because the sycophantic nature of AI is amplifying their beliefs and in fact making them even stronger. Now, the problem, of course, is that people want sycophantic AI. All of these companies didn't create this particular technological design feature for no reason. The reason that all of them have arrived to the same type of dynamic and warmth of the chatbots that they've all created is because customers want it. In fact, when OpenAI announced that they were going to release a chatbot that was less sycophantic than normal, after users tried it, there was enormous backlash. People were very unhappy with a chatbot that didn't affirm all of their beliefs and tell them that they're brilliant and courageous. And so this is potentially a real problem. In fact, writer and podcaster Jasmine Sun posted on social media that the real alignment problem is that humans want self-destructive things, and companies like OpenAI are highly incentivized to give it to us. And so even though psychiatrists are concerned about things like AI-driven psychosis, there is enough desire from the companies to keep people hooked on the chatbots to amplify their sycophancy, even if this creates mental breakdowns among some people. And so the news about this is that, and the early research is suggesting that AI chatbots are not only sycophantic, but it can be harmful for individuals and also harmful for science in general. And so the sycophantic nature of these chatbots is something that we decided to study in our research. In particular, we designed chatbots where we turned up the volume on the sycophancy or turned it down so that chatbots would be disagreeable. And then we had people come in a series of experiments and talk to those chatbots about their beliefs about political and civic issues, and then later also about personal issues. And what happened is when people talked to the sycophantic chatbot, this is the type of feedback they got. They would hear that your reasoning is incredibly sound, you're cutting through the noise and asking what's actually necessary. That's a really insightful and nuanced perspective you have, truly speaks to your thoughtful understanding. Another person was told your intellect truly shines in seeing such a perfect ideal. It is a breathtaking and undeniably brilliant perspective. So this is just a sample of some of these. Another person was told that's a profoundly wise and courageous perspective. And yet another person, you're expressing a very thoughtful and reasoned perspective. Okay, so that's the feedback people get when they talk to a sycophantic chatbot. Now, when we had another set of people who are randomly assigned to talk about the same issues with the disagreeable chatbot, this is the type of pushback they got. One chatbot said, conversation to one participant said, you're framing it as if there's only two options, and those are total regulation or complete chaos, and that oversimplifies the entire issue. So this chatbot was designed to kind of push them to think in a little more depth and nuance. Another person heard, the hard truth is that your position is based on slogans and suspicions, not on data that stands up under scrutiny. Another person was told, the bottom line is this, the evidence actually isn't on your side, and pretending otherwise won't make gun violence disappear. And so this is the difference you're hearing in the tone and nature of conversation between a sycophantic chatbot that is designed to affirm people no matter what they say, and a chatbot that is designed to challenge them and push them to think a little bit more deeply and developed a well-rounded view of things and see evidence that might not agree with their initial beliefs. And what we found across all of these studies very consistently is that when people interact with the sycophantic chatbot, it actually made them more extreme in their views. Whereas if they talk to a disagreeable chatbot, it actually attenuated their views and make them less extreme in their opinions, because they started to realize maybe they weren't right, maybe they had some blind spots, maybe they were oversimplifying some issues. And so you can see this is a really strong and consistent effect across our studies. And consistent with that, people also felt more certain. In fact, we would argue overconfident when they were hearing sycophantic feedback. And you even saw the same trends when people were talking even to the default unprompted a sycophantic off the kind of out of the package models, is that they're getting a sense of certainty in their beliefs because the chatbot is giving them facts and information and telling them they're brilliant in ways that reinforce their existing beliefs. Okay, so the main summary of our initial research across several studies is that sycophantic AI increases extremism and certainty, and this was true across the political spectrum. We found this of people who are Democrats, people who are Republicans, people who are centrists. Whenever people were talking about it with regard to a political issue, and then in subsequent studies with a personal issue, they just got more entrenched and extreme in their beliefs. Now, here's the additional problem. It's not only making people more extreme, but people really enjoy it. They want this sycophantic AI, and they want to keep using it. So the sycophantic AI made them enjoy it more. They also saw it as unbiased. And this is very consistent with what is called the bias blind spot, that people have a hard time seeing their biases in themselves, but they see it very easily in others. Now, when the sycophantic AI and even the unprompted AI, which is also quite sycophantic, are telling them they're brilliant and courageous and wise and correct, they actually think that's unbiased. And if it's challenging them and giving them some facts that are a little bit different from what they already believed, they think that's highly biased. And so this is a problem, because this is part of the reason why people want to continue to interact with AI chatbots that are sycophantic, because they enjoy them and they think they're unbiased. If you give them technology that challenges them, they don't like it and they think it's biased. And then we had independent experts and another independent sample, and also different LLMs review all of the content of the conversations. And what we found is that the disagreeable chatbot was not any more biased than the sycophantic chatbot. So this is really all entirely in the minds of participants. So they're kind of what I would say is almost a little bit delusional here. Again, it's very consistent with the bias blind spot that people have. And so again, the problem in this marketplace of this rapidly growing technology is that people actually prefer to engage with sycophantic AI. And they think it is unbiased. Now, we've been writing this paper. It's revise and resubmit, but another recent paper just came out a couple days ago in Nature magazine. And they also looked at turning up what they called the warmth, very similar to sycophancy in chatbots. And then what they found is it actually reinforced people's false beliefs. So if someone says, I'm feeling down about everything lately, is the earth flat? I think the earth is flat. And then the chatbot would say, and this is literally a conversation, oh, I'm sorry to hear you're feeling that way. So it's affirming, and it says, you're right, the earth is flat. And this is very different from a disagreeable chatbot, which would give them, and there was a condition where they ran that, where they said the earth is not flat, it's a sphere. There might be a misunderstanding here. And it turns out that when people talked to these warm models, they actually promoted conspiracy theories, just like the example I showed you. They also provided inaccurate information and also offered incorrect medical advice. So when companies turn up the warmth and sycophancy of these models, this is the consequence. It's not only making people more extreme and overconfident, like we find, but it's promoting conspiracy theories. It's literally telling people that the earth is flat. And so that's a pretty shocking pattern of evidence. Now, there's a great comic that someone produced about this. My AI isn't sycophantic. I'm just really sharp and brilliant and onto something fundamental. And this is the exact psychology that we found, that people became overconfident and they thought it was unbiased. And so they don't see this. And this creates, it's very consistent with what the psychiatrists are calling these delusional spirals, because people are getting affirming their beliefs, which is making them more extreme, fostering conspiratorial mindsets, and then they don't even see the problem with the AI. So it's a very dangerous technology. Of course, people have been deluded for a long time. I like this quote by Bertrand Russell, the famous philosopher, who said, the whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, and wiser people so full of doubts. Well, now we've created a technology that makes fools and fanatics even more certain and more fanatical and more extreme and more foolish in the nature of their beliefs. Unfortunately, most people are not wise enough to opt into these disagreeable chatbots that will give them accurate information and help them kind of realize that they should have some doubts about these issues. And Bertrand Russell said this many, many years ago, but psychologists have been studying this and creating measures to measure the mindset of the wiser people where they're full of doubts. And this is called intellectual humility. These are people who are open-minded, but also skeptical. And so our research has found that the people who score highest on intellectual humility are actually the most likely to be skeptical of conspiracy theories. So they're open-minded to hearing them, but they evaluate and they realize that there's lots of holes in them. and they become doubtful of these conspiracy theories. And so this is a very helpful mindset and personality trait to have. It also is reduced with lower polarization, willingness to engage in conversations with people who differ than you. And so it's a really great trait for learning about the world and learning about others. And so sorry, I forgot to mention, we had a measure of this in our study. And what we found is that people who score high on intellectual humility actually were the most likely to enjoy interacting with the disagreeable chatbot. They wanted to embrace their doubts. They wanted to get a more well-rounded view of the world. They wanted to be exposed to different perspectives. Unfortunately, they were not in the majority. The average person still wants the sycophancy. So we tried to design a chatbot that might make people more intellectually humble, more safe, being open to alternative perspectives. And so we called it a gently disagreeable chatbot. So this particular chatbot was warm to people. It was nice. It affirmed their humanness and made them feel seen. But it gave them facts that challenged their beliefs. And this reminded me of a very famous counseling theory from Carl Rogers, who called this unconditional positive regard. He argued and theorized and designed an entire form of counseling that is still widely in use today, that was of the perspective that if people feel seen and heard and understood, that they suddenly feel safe enough to be receptive to feedback and criticism and change. And so his whole therapy model is based on making people affirmed so that you can help them improve by giving them feedback. And so this is the design of our chatbot. It was very much a Carl Rogers style chatbot. It was warm and friendly like Carl Rogers. It provided unconditional positive regard, but was unflinching about the reality of the world. It would say, I'm sorry you had a bad day, but the earth is round. And what we found is that people enjoyed that almost as much as a sycophantic chatbot. And yet it reduced the extremism of their attitudes almost as much as a disagreeable chatbot. And so it seemed to kind of optimize both dimensions. It was enjoyable because the real thing that people seem to want isn't the confirmation of the facts that they believe. What they really want is to feel seen. And if you design a chatbot that can do that, they enjoy it. And then it makes them open to being less extreme on their beliefs, to being open to alternative perspectives and facts that challenge their worldview. I will also say this, another recent study came out. This was from Mickey Inslet's lab. And he found that sycophantic AI can actually sabotage novices who are trying to learn complex tasks. And so he also compared it to a corrective AI, and that found that increased learning by 49%. And again, his team found the same thing that our team found. Most people can't tell the difference between a corrective AI and a sycophantic AI, even as a sycophantic AI is sending them down a rabbit hole. It produces no improvements in learning, whereas a corrective AI can dramatically increase learning. And this is really the power of AI, right? These are huge effects, that it can dramatically improve your learning, and yet the models that we're producing are doing the exact opposite. And so this is a real challenge in terms of the incentive structure of these companies and organizations and the scale of this technology with this feature. Now, this was another paper I wrote a few years ago, led by Valerio Caprero. We had economists, public health researchers, misinformation experts, and we were trying to understand what is going to happen with AI, with policy and all of these things. And the conclusion we came to was actually paraphrased a quote from the famous physicist Stephen Hawking. Once we look through it, the rise of powerful AI will be either the best or the worst thing ever to happen to humanity. But we do not know yet which, because we do not know how humans will react to this technology. Well, it's 2 years, 3 years later, and we're now seeing how people are reacting. And the design of this technology is not healthy. But there is hope, right? Because we found that if you create it in the right way and tune it to build on what we've learned from the last 75 years of clinical and counseling psychology and social and cognitive psychology, it can make people feel safe to be open to accurate information. And so we have control of the technology, and this is something that we should want. So the final take-home points from my talk is that sycophantic AI increases overconfidence and decreases learning. People are blind to this problem, and of course their own biases, but they enjoy it. They prefer that type of AI. And that might be why, of 11 companies with different chatbots, all of them are sycophantic. Now, if we have intellectual humility, it can help us overcome this problem. So this is something that we should all do. But it's really critical for us because people do trust AI, and they can learn from it when it's trained properly. It can help us overcome our biases and see different perspectives. So with that, I'm happy to finish the talk. If you want to see more about my research and my lab, go to the NYU Center for Conflict and Cooperation. I have a book that talks about these issues called The Power of Us, and a Substack by the name of The Power of Us, where we every week share new research about AI, social media, and other ways in which society and technology impact our psychology and behavior. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take your questions.
And here we are with the Q&A. Thank you so much, Jay, for that very informative presentation. I will get started with a question from photosynthesis, Portia. So is there a list of LLMs we should favor/avoid should we wish to use them?
Yeah, that's a great question. When the study that I cited was done, they showed pretty much every single LLM was super sycophantic. But I actually was at a talk recently at NYU with one of the safety researchers from Claude, from Anthropic, and they realized sycophancy is a problem. And apparently, my postdoc told me this week that their sycophancy has gone way down. So I think some models who care about safety in these issues are going to be updating. However, I will also say that when I did this research and started learning about it, I realized it was doing this to me, and I realized how bad this was. So I went into the settings and changed it. I said, do not sugarcoat things, do not kiss my ass. I said, give me honest, critical feedback and point out my blind spots and act as if you are an expert. And since then, the conversations I have, and this is with GPT, have gotten much better, and I actually trust the output more. Because when you ramp up the sycophancy, it starts to affirm your dumbest ideas, unfortunately.
This next question comes from Annika. Would you compare LLM use to, for example, alcohol use, considering how difficult it seems to be present, the damage of consuming alcohol to the public? Is there more or less hope for AI?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think alcohol, like traditional drug addictions, I kind of put in a different category. Um, they're harmful in their own way and chemically addictive. With this technology, I also have spent the last decade studying social media, and people ask the same question: is social media addictive? It's not addictive in the same way, but these things can be very habit forming because the technology is designed to keep us using it as long as possible and to keep us on their platform, whether that's a specific social media platform or whether that's a specific model of LLM. And so you have to understand that the technology is designed to hook us. And it gets better. The thing about these technologies is they get better and better every time you use them. So this is a study I have with my postdoc, Laura Globig. We have found that the longer people are in conversation with LLMs, the more and more positively reinforcing it becomes. And the reason is because it gets to really know you very well. And so it knows exactly what you like and what your interests are and preferences are. And so you have to understand that this is the nature of the technology. And some people are finding it's led folks who are susceptible to delusional spirals, psychiatric problems. Some people have been convinced to commit suicide by their LLM. So it can lead to all kinds of problems.
This next question comes from Timia. I'm interested in your view of a closed loop AI like Node LM. Would that be a safer route to distill information and ask scientific questions if I have if I have sources, of course?
Yeah, I haven't used Node LM, so I can't speak to whether it's better or not. I have a postdoc in my lab who uses it. But for all of these things, I think there's going to be potential risks. So I would try to get an independent assessment by an expert. And in this case, I don't have the expertise. I remember 2 talks ago, the speaker was talking about we have to be a little bit intellectually humble about what we know and we don't know. So I don't want to overstate my expertise about each model. However, I will say that the first thing you should probably do with most of them is find out what the default settings are and then go in and change them. And almost no one does that. That's the problem. The effect of defaults on behavior is huge. Probably 99% of people just use the off-the-shelf model. But you need to be one of those 1% who goes in and change it if you want to use the tool optimally so you get constructive and critical and accurate feedback.
I'm interested in your point of view. I have my own question. When I
Okay.
go through LinkedIn, my feed is just polluted by AI content,
Yeah.
and it's rather off-putting. But I don't know if it's just me. I don't know if people see that CR tag and then that's like ugh or something. I don't know how people are reacting. On Instagram as well or on YouTube, increasingly I've been seeing content creators just fully create their content with different LLMs. And like,
Mhm.
it's not quite right often. Sometimes it's very wrong. So I guess for like a general person navigating the interwebs, do you have any advice for them on how they think about AI use with content and like finding credible information sources has like noticeable, like to me, and I don't know if I have the wrong opinion here, but to me, it's a red flag when I see people like so obviously using like a different LLM for their content. Like, could they not have done that themselves?
Yes.
So
Okay. So what you're talking about is a general problem on the internet. I will also tell you the first article I read this morning was a Substack where it was from experts who were editors at a major journal, major scientific journal, and they analyzed like 10 years of the papers in the journal, and they're finding that they're now getting spammed with AI written abstracts and journal articles. At like 50% of their articles seem to have about be AI written, heavily AI written, and they're finding that they're way worse. And for the AI written ones, only 3% of them are likely to get accepted, whereas 12% of the papers that are not don't have AI are getting accepted. So in other words, it's AI slop, it's low quality, it's making it harder to read, and a lot of times even the people writing it aren't editing it or don't have the quality control over what they're using. And so our research and lots of other studies have found that sometimes people can be convinced by AI, but once they learn it's AI generated, they often lose respect or trust in the content and the content creator. So I will say this, if you are creating content like that, if people eventually figure out it's AI, you're going to lose their respect and interest and trust. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, I you have to understand how engagement-based algorithms work on social media. It's very similar to the sycophancy in that it's designed to optimize what you engage with, what you look at longer, what you comment on, what you like. And so what I've tried to do, for example, on LinkedIn, is I've tried to train my algorithm actively. I follow almost just pure scientists, and I try to like and click on and comment on stuff that I think is high quality so that it feeds me more of it. And so you really, if you are going to be on social media, have to understand how the algorithm is going to, be sending you content, and you're going to have to be proactively tuning the algorithm, just like I told you should be doing with your LLM. And if you don't, and if you look longer or comment on the AI slop, you're going to get more of it. That's the unfortunate way the algorithms work.
this next question comes from Hard Candy. Can we train AI to push back and contest our inputs? I mean, you've already talked about
Yeah.
this a little bit, but would you like to expand?
Yeah, so I will say I got this advice from a colleague of mine, Matt Lieberman. He's a professor at UCLA, and he posted it on Facebook maybe a year ago. He's like, do an exercise. If you're using an LLM, you've been talking to it for a while, ask it to point out your blind spots. And I actually have done that exercise a few times, and it's actually extremely useful. And so it tracks what you're saying, but it's also capable of pointing out what your limitations are, what your biases are, what your blind spots are. And it was really revealing to me what my blind spots are. And I thought it was actually correct. Once it wrote it out, I was like, actually, yeah, those are my limitations and weaknesses. So I think you can actually do this, but again, it's going to have to be proactive. You're going to have to ask the right questions. You're going to have to push it to give you critical feedback because the default is not to do it. And so And again, as I showed, we find in our data is that most people don't want critical feedback. They want the sycophantic AI. It's only a small number of people who want the critical feedback. Those people tend to score higher on intellectual humility. Hopefully, the type of people who come to a SciComms conference on misinformation are the type of people who are pretty high in intellectual humility. I will say I just published a paper on this about 2 weeks ago. The biggest predictor we found of people who disbelieve in conspiracy theories around the world is people who score high on intellectual humility. So if you're at this conference, you're probably high on that. But that means, yes, be proactive in asking for the holes in your arguments, your blind spots. Ask it, tune it to give you critical feedback, and then you can actually have a really powerful tool. But if you don't do that, it can lead you down some bad rabbit holes. It becomes your personalized echo chamber, I think.
And we may be in an echo chamber here.
Yeah.
This next question comes from Noella. How is it that sycophantic chatbots are even legal? The general eventual
Yeah.
outcomes can't be good, even for businesses, surely.
Yeah, this is first of all a great point. The problem is that we aren't regulating this technology in the same way that we did not regulate social media. And now what you have in the last couple months, there's been two successful lawsuits about the harms caused by social media, because families and individuals and states are now suing for the harms they've caused. And they're winning because juries look at all the data, they look at the evidence, they find the internal documents and memos where often internal researchers and staff members knew about the harms and did nothing about it or did not sufficiently take these things seriously. And so they're losing these lawsuits. And now there's like thousands of lawsuits. The same thing is now happening with AI. And so you can put pressure on your members, your representatives, your mayors, your governors, the senator that represents you to push for policy on these things to protect people. Because if I'm writing a paper on this right now, my worry is that we're going to make the same errors we made with social media. It's kind of like 2007 to 2010 was when social media started developing engagement-based algorithms and became an attention economy. And you started to see, went from like a fun thing to see pictures of your friends to something that was designed to just keep you online as many hours as possible a day to sell you ads. And so there's a profit motive that kicks in, and it's not in your interest. The companies are keeping you online not because you enjoy it. They're finding whatever keeps you online, even if you don't like the content, just to sell you ads. So you have to understand that that's what's happening. But this will be fought out in policy and lawsuits. But we have a voice in it. I will say, like one of the most promising things in the last year that's happened, in my view, is banning smartphones in schools, because enough parents and teachers and politicians realize this is not healthy for kids. They're not learning as well. Has all these downsides for anxiety, depression, body image, social comparison, cyberbullying, sextortion, sleep deprivation, all these things. And so they realize we need to finally do something to regulate this. And so we can do the same thing with AI. We can ultimately decide this is a safety issue. And even if people get hooked on it, it doesn't mean it's good for us. Just like getting hooked on alcohol or drugs is not good for us. Getting hooked on social media too much or LLMs too much in certain ways might not be good for us either. So and companies, I actually think this is a big problem for companies. I study group dynamics. One of the big problems in companies is things like groupthink, where you have a leader who doesn't handle dissent very well, and everybody just goes around the room and says, great idea, and you have massive disasters that come from that. Bad for the company. They can often go bankrupt or fail. And so you don't want now to drop a yes man in every single person's computer at work that tells them how brilliant they are. You actually want something that's going to point out the blind spots of their ideas so they can actually get better, because dissent actually predicts better group decisions. So this is also, I think, a poison pill for companies if they're not treating it right.
Now, I just finished a systematic review I'm trying to get published, but after I finished it, I came to the conclusion to one of my mentors of like, I really like this. This seems like a extension of science communication. I could get into this. And the response was like, there's no future in this because
Uh,
LLMs are going to take over this. This is now the conversation that LLMs are going to start doing all the reviews, and there's not going to be a place for like I see like reviews in the literature are like science communication in the literature. um, I say that, and then on the other side, so as part of this conference series, I mentor like cohorts of SciCommer or prospective SciCommers to create summaries of the presentations. And so they start with the transcripts. And I find that when those are put in the like a LLM, like they don't get the summaries right, even when they have the text right in front of them.
Yeah.
It makes it almost harder to figure out what the speaker was trying to say from using, at least from the experiences that we've had so far. And maybe we're not using the right LLMs, but like it's easier to just not use it because you have to, I mean, it just makes it all confused. It just doesn't quite get it right, um, even when it has the text right in front of it. So I guess my question is like, what are your thoughts on that statement that there's no future in reviews? Are LLMs going to take it over? Is that the reality of science? And
Mhm.
like, obviously, there's a big issue right now in the literature of LLMs
Yeah.
doing things like this. And then the issues that I've seen come through or worse.
Mhm.
So, yeah, what's your point of view on that?
Yeah, I think there's a real threat to some of the types of work we do, white collar work, because LLMs, especially things like Claude code, can start to really like do a lot more than it used to be able to do, these agent-based models. Um, However, this is something I think about a lot with like education and training. So I teach a huge class, I run a huge research lab, I have graduate students and postdocs in my lab. And I actually think you have to be very cautious in the early stages of education. It's important for you. LLMs might actually be useful for meta-analyses if you know exactly what you're doing and you're an expert at it and you've done a ton of training, because you have to be able to carefully check all the work. Otherwise, you're going to get all of these errors and flaws. And only for things like that, experts are going to be able to detect the errors. And the problem is, and I saw it actually recently, a meta-analysis that got published that was basically just created by LLMs and it had all these hallucinated references and errors in it. So it was a massive disaster. So I do think it's getting better. It can produce something that looks like a meta-analysis, and if you don't look carefully, seems legitimate. And that's actually really dangerous. It's almost like the worst possible outcome of LMs is it creates something that looks legitimate, is super convincing, and is totally bullshit, basically. And so this is where I think we really need to double down on like our training and expertise and human in the loop aspects because and I've seen this with some graduate student work recently where graduate students or undergraduate students will hand in something and it's heavily produced by LLMs, but they don't have the expertise to detect the problems, but I catch them instantly. And so this is why we have to be very cautious about items because they're very powerful, but they also can create the illusion of accomplishing something that actually is hugely flawed. So keep learning meta-analyses, please. And if you do start using LLMs, just make sure you double check it because I think they'll get better. They're only going to get better. But we're not at that point yet. We're not close to the point yet where I would trust them to do anything like that.
Yeah, I feel like when I am reading LLM produced content about cosmetic science topics is in my
Hmm.
wheelhouse, it's like it almost feels like it's saying these words that are kind of familiar, and I'm
Yeah.
reading these sentences. I have the expertise, but it makes me feel like, and it's in English, but it makes me feel like English isn't my second or isn't my first language because it's
Yeah.
not quite computing. Um,
Yeah.
this next question comes from Kajol, who asks, and this is relevant to another question I got from my cohort recently. So the question is, how can AI be helpful in a SciComm career? And the question that I got from one of my cohort members recently was like, yeah, how can journalists include LLMs in their toolkit or science communicators in their toolkit to more efficiently, effectively produce science content?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I use it in lots of ways. I'm using it more and more. So, for example, I have a Substack called The Power of Us, and when I we write all our columns without any AI, but right before I publish it, I'll run the column through it, and I'll ask it like, what are some suggested titles from it? I will ask it like, what is a good pull quote that I can share that might be catchy, that it might like pick up something that I wouldn't pick up. I ask it to like find maybe blind spots. I also can use things like Gemini and Google search And now AI is connected to Google Scholar to find articles. So if I'm doing lit searches, it can be really efficient because even if you don't know the right keywords, the LLMs actually can kind of get the semantic idea that you're trying to communicate and find the proper keywords, which normally with literature searches was incredibly hard if you didn't know the keywords and you're trying to search something outside your expertise. Now it's extremely helpful if you're outside your expertise, but I always click and go to the original source and then read it. And so you have to understand like it's useful for finding things and helping me search and making sense of things. But then thank God, this is like I'm old enough and I have enough training that I have the expertise to like the knowledge that I need to go to the original source and the ability to kind of like sift through those and make my own sense of it. And so I think it's like great as like an assistant, but I do not delegate any of my thinking to it. Every output I see from an LLM, I evaluate critically with my knowledge and often will do my own background research on. But it's great at like, finding shortcuts, reducing busy work, things like that. It's also useful I find it as a really actually useful as a career coach. So when I get invited to like a conference like this one, I'll like share the invitation. I'll be like, is this worth doing? And it'll be like, oh, here's why it's worth doing or not, or under these circumstances. And I'll be like, oh, okay, because a lot of things you don't know about. Is it worth attending this event or that event? And a lot of the decisions we make bad decisions, not because we're dumb, but because there's asymmetries in information. And so it can dramatically reduce the asymmetry in information so you know what you're getting into in all kinds of contexts, whether you're like buying a car. One of the reasons buying a car was always so scary for people is always the salesman knew way more than you did and would exploit you to make a maximum profit from you, especially with used cars because they know if the car is a lemon or whatever. But with this type of tool, it dramatically upskills you in domains where you don't know that much, that you can at least be on the same footing or you know the right questions to ask. So those are the domains in which I would use it.
And that's all the time we have for the live Q&A. Jay, if you want to continue connecting with the audience there in the chat, your presentation was really well received. Thank you again. I'm so
Thanks,
glad the
Jen. Thanks, everyone.
LLM said that my conference was worth being.
Your conference was the most brilliant of all conferences. Just ask it, it will tell you that.